Thank you very much, Melinda. I asked Melinda to speak a little bit about the Secondary Cities project, knowing full well it would eat into some of my time in the keynote, which is just fine, I think, with me and probably with everybody else. But I want to say a word about Melinda. She was a Jefferson Science Fellow and served in my office at the State Department for a year. And it's very difficult for outside academics to come into a place like the Department of State and figure out what to do that makes a difference. And Melinda came in actually with a background in working with indigenous peoples and very quickly found out that at the State Department, that didn't have as much resonance as the challenge of urbanization did. And so she quickly pivoted and helped us develop this project in secondary cities. And part of the Jefferson Science Fellowship program builds into the fact that there's supposed to be a 5-day relationship ongoing, and I'm very happy that we've got Melinda in the first year probably working more than she ever anticipated, so I want to really give her tremendous thanks. I'd also like to thank Harvard Center for Geographic Analysis, and in particular Jason Ur and Wendy Guan for hosting this event. Also, I'd like to thank the consortium of university partners with which my office is collaborating under the National Science Foundation-supported Spatiotemporal Innovation Center. That includes, in addition to Harvard, Santa Barbara, represented by Keith Clark, and also George Mason. I saw Phil Yang just got off the plane and made it here. Oh, there you are. Thank you very much, Phil. And I'd like to thank also those who have been participating in my office's Secondary Cities project, in addition to Melinda, her team out of Colorado State, Faith, David, Sophia, as well as our implementing partners, such as Kristen Miller, who's here from EcoCity Builders. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you here in the audience who have joined us to share your best practices and lessons learned related in particular to community-based mapping efforts and the applications of tools and technologies of our trade to figure out how best to gain a better understanding of an increasingly complex set of interactions and human relationships in our rapidly changing urban world. So my official responsibilities as the geographer at the Department of State really just have to do with how all boundaries and sovereignty issues are portrayed on all US government maps. So I work with boundaries, I work on maps. My office produces all of the maps for the Department of State and other parts of the government. And just in the past month, I've had an opportunity to speak at a couple of events which really had me gazing internally at my job and my responsibilities. One of them was up in New York where Parag Khanna did his book launch of his new book, Connectography. And he spoke about the fact that boundaries don't matter anymore. And then Sandy Pentland from MIT yesterday in his very enlightening keynote talked about the fact that everything we map is bogus. So I've had the honor of speaking at 2 events, which are basically working myself out of a job. So I'm looking forward to retirement very soon. So my comments today aren't really designed as a keynote. I think Sandy did a tremendous job yesterday talking about the importance of mapping behavior and the way we need to really rethink of what we put down on maps. What I plan on doing today is kind of to take a more of a 10,000-foot view and to provide a challenge and a charge to you all to help us by sharing solutions you found to attacking the challenge of mapping human geography in the urban context. So how do we display human behavior on a map? Digital or paper or static or interactive or virtual or real? We need to be able to display somehow and visualize and analyze the social and cultural activities that define our behavior. So, and I want to make no mistake about the fact that mapping human geography is really challenging. It's hard, and we're still figuring out the best way forward. There are no easy techniques, there are no right or wrong solutions, but I think that's why meetings like this, where we bring different people together, different organizations, different experiences, different cultures, different countries, different government perspectives, only by integrating these public-private relationships that we're fostering can we really do a better job of the challenge of mapping human geography. So I am convinced that the best path forward is one that involves collaborating with local government, empowering communities, incentivizing universities, and attracting public sector and NGO commitments to join the quest for the best information available and to share that data as broadly as possible. So for the remainder of my time today, I'm going to have a short presentation I put together that will tell a bit of a story, and it's going to be a story about really a decade-long effort and struggle I've had with several of my colleagues in the U.S. government to what I call mainstream human geography throughout of the much of the government, particularly the defense and intelligence enterprises, where the very term human geography had not only disappeared from the lexicon, but in many sectors was actually anathema. So this will be a story about the need for a more global context and understanding about the need for human geography data at finer spatial scales, the need for tools that allow for these data to be generated, the need for minimally technically proficient people to collect the data that will be used for monitoring, analysis, and decision-making, and most importantly, the need for local partnerships with the communities that best understand their own social and cultural milieus. I'm going to start out, if it works, with a little video clip, however. So let's see what happens.
Ich befürchte, dass keiner von Ihnen ein einziges Wort Deutsch spricht. Es sind Freunde aus Italien. Dies hier ist der hervorragende Sensationsdarsteller Enzo Gorlami. Ein sehr talentierter Kameramann, Antonio Margheriti, und Antonios Kameraassistent Dominique De Cocco. Signori, questo è un vecchio amico mio, colonnello Hans Landa della SS.
Buongiorno.
Signori, è un piacere. Gli amici della vedetta ammirata da tutti noi, questa gemma propria della nostra cultura, saranno naturalmente accolti sotto la mia protezione per la durata del loro soggiorno.
Grazie.
Gorlomi? Lo pronuncio correttamente?
Sì, corretto.
Gorlomi? Per cortesia, me lo ripeti ancora.
Gorlami.
Mi scusi, con me?
Gorlami.
Ancora una volta.
Gorlami.
E come si chiama lei?
Antonio Margareti.
Ancora?
Margareti.
Un'altra volta, ma adesso vorrei proprio sentire la musica delle parole.
Margareti.
Margheriti. E lei?
Dominic De Cocco.
Come?
Dominic De Cocco.
Bravo, bravo.
Ich glaube, meine Kamerafreunde müssen ihre Plätze finden.
Lasciatemi vedere I vostri biglietti. Ich glaube, für einen Star von Ihrem Status wird es nicht allzu schwierig gewesen sein, Premierenkarten für Ihre Freunde zu besorgen. 0023, 0024 non sarà troppo difficile di trovare. Arrivederci.
Arrivederci. Arrivederci.
Arrivederci.
Okay, I probably let that run a little too long, but I love that scene. So the, let's see if I can. So when I started trying to figure out how we can best, map social and cultural behavior, I ran into a whole number of programs throughout the U.S. government that were trying to manage this challenge, and not the least of which was our efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we were sending people into Afghanistan with 6 months of Pashtun training and having them sit together with village leaders, in circles and with their legs crossed, and thinking that they could understand their cultures. It's a hard thing to do, and you can see by the example in the film that unless you really have a tremendous understanding, deep understanding, native language proficiency, that's a very tough nut to crack. And in fact, it's very difficult to have anybody who comes from another country and another culture to go into communities and better understand them. So my goal was to provide the tools and technologies for people to map their own human geography. But just very quickly, I want to bring you through some of the programs that were in effect being funded throughout the US government at the time when I started figuring out how we could best attack this. We had, and I'm going to go through this fast, the definitions aren't important, but these are all separate programs from different agencies with different funding lines. All right? This was a DIA program. That was a Navy program. This was an Army program. This was an NGA program. This is a Marine Corps Intelligence Activity program. This is a DoD granting project. So I saw all this mess, and I was saying, well, why don't we call this really what it is? Basically, it's all human geography. Let's give it that name. Try to fund it and develop programs under something that we already had a canon, we already had a discipline, we already had a literature. And I admit I'm biased. I am a human geographer. If I get accused of being a geographic determinist, I feel like I've done my job. And we already have this framework with which to do analysis. At the same time, during this decade-long struggle that I talked about, the National Science Foundation, the National Research Council had a series of studies that were tackling the same exact issues, where we're trying to figure out how we can do a better job of getting information at appropriate scale in greater details about populations and other factors, like food security, human health. These are all human geography themes. And I have a quote from our friend, Keith Clark. I hope I'm not misquoting you, but it says, volunteer geographic information, someone please take control. So it was a mess out there. At the same time, the State Department and USAID launched their quadrennial diplomacy and development review, which was trying to integrate what the state and development, what the diplomacy and development communities were doing with our defense communities to try to integrate all their efforts. Required leadership on this issue. There wasn't anybody who was playing a leadership role. We created what is called the Worldwide Human Geography Data Working Group out of the U.S. Government Human Geography Working Group, which I was made chair of at their first meeting because I did not go to it, which is what usually happens when you don't go to a meeting. But mostly because there was a recognition in the defense and intelligence communities that organizations like State Department and USAID really are the organizations that are better positioned to partner with local governments and local communities and do a better job of understanding them. So I posited a return to human geography based on networks and partnerships that allow you to do a better job of figuring out what data you need, to promote participatory community-based mapping. And I just threw this quote in at the end: the government's tools are our children's toys, which I think we find out increasingly more every year. I borrowed this from Dan Sui, who's done a lot of work in community-based mapping over the years, to talk about the changing scale and the global scale that we can collect information from satellites and other remote sensing platforms are gradually becoming less and less important, or not less important, but we have more data that are at a local scale, even down to the genetic scale or inside buildings, for instance. And for that type of collection of information, we can no longer do it by building machines, or at least not large machines. I borrowed this from Melinda. This is her view at big data. What would happen traditionally is if the U.S. government wanted to find out tribal information in a place like Yemen, where we very important to understand the cultural imprint of the various different tribes and ethnic groups on the land, they would not unusually so hire a contractor to go put information together. They would go to a library in the UK and get old data that were bad when they were first collected and project them to data that are even worse now, and they would fill in the map, because if you're contracted to provide data, you need to fill in all the holes, and that's the danger of mapping. If you have holes and you fill it, you want to get the best available data. So from all this big data and all this big noise, It's really a challenge to get the best available data. There were some discussions yesterday on quality control, quality assurance. That's another issue I think this group needs to deal with. But if you look at best available data and you take an acronym of that, very often the best available data ends up being bad data. So we have to be very careful in our rush to fill the map that we don't use bad data. Another slide I borrowed from Melinda to show the bottom-up as opposed to top-down approach that we're fostering. I think all of these different tools can be magnified tenfold with various different options and apps and widgets that are out there today. But the whole point is you need to provide the tools and technologies and the training and the partnerships to empower local populations. And my final slide is a challenge that I've put out to my colleagues in the government, that there needs to be a commitment to build a satellite to collect human geography data. And this commitment needs to be at least as large as the commitment that we make to build satellites to collect physical and terrestrial data. There doesn't seem to be a problem with spending $1 billion to try to get digital elevation data, but to put similar money and effort into trying to understand peoples and cultures, there's not the same type of a commitment, and I would argue that more conflict and more lives are lost because of our lack of understanding about people than our lack of understanding about digital elevation. So this is the challenge that I'd like all you to embrace, to figure out, to consider yourself part of this satellite. And again, this is a euphemistic satellite. I've shown this slide many times, and people come up to me afterwards and say, I didn't know we had a satellite that could go out and collect religion. Can they really do that? And I said, no. And the key thing is to figure out what your priorities are, because we can't collect the whole world, and we don't have to collect information about the whole world. Figure out where we have the gaps that we can fill with the networks we have, to scale it appropriately. I've never seen anybody satisfied with scale. If we get neighborhoods, they want household. If they get household, they want bedrooms. Nobody's ever said, oh, that's great. That's perfect scale for me. And again, and then we have to cost it out. It needs to be funded. It needs to be supported. So that's my challenge to you all today. I want to get back on track. I think there's room for a couple of questions, but I've also been invited to sit with the first panel after they present their views, and I could potentially follow up if there's any interest at that time as well. So a couple of questions. We have 2 minutes. Okay. Up. Yes.
So I like the metaphor of the satellite. Sorry, I should wait for the mic.
Turn it on. Sorry, I don't know how to turn it on. Sorry.
Here. I feel like the price is right, or come on down.
I thought it was being recorded or something, so otherwise, yeah. The metaphor about satellite, love that as a metaphor, as a reformed satellite guy. I've often said satellite guys are not the right people to define in situ observations and how they're collected and merged together. Have you had any thoughts about that, or you strictly think of it as a metaphor, or do you really think there should be, do you think the satellite guys should lead human geography? That's what this implies to me.
No, I think there needs to be a partnership between the satellite guys and the in situ people. And right now there's a disconnect because the priorities are not synced.
Yes.
So, but I think it needs to be a partnership. And a lot of what we're doing in the Secondary Cities Project involves first doing satellite work, doing change detection, finding out where we need to focus our attention to get new information, get the foundation data, and then fill it in with human geography themes. Okay, we're back on schedule. Thank you.